A forest is an aggregation or a grouping of trees. And some forests have just a very few species, but many forests here in Indiana have many species of trees. And in addition to that, we have a lot of plants and shrubs and vines, and of course the wildlife that's part of the forest as well. So it's a very complex community. When the European settlers first got here in Indiana, we were approximately 85% forested. So most of the state had forests in some condition across the area. Now, when the European settlers got here, they were interested primarily in clearing areas to produce crops that they could live off of and also ultimately sell. And so they rapidly started clearing forest areas as quickly as they could to provide areas for them to grow their families, grow their crops, and develop their farms and homes. And so through that history, Indiana's forests gradually started shrinking through the 1800s. We started at about 85% forested. By about 1900 to 1920, we were down to about 5 or 6% forested. And so we went from 20 million acres of forest to about 1.5 million acres of forest in about 100 years of settlement. So that conversion was actually pretty rapid through time. There were also a variety of other things happening to the forests that were left, and that was that livestock was a big part of the settlers' lives as well. In the 1860s, we have records to indicate that we actually had more hogs than people in Indiana. And many of those hogs were free-ranging hogs working through the forest, digging up soil, eating the nuts and berries, and actually creating quite a bit of damage. And so there were a lot of things working against our forests through this settlement period. We've made a great recovery in forested area in Indiana. We went from about 1.5 million acres of forest in the early 1900s to over 4.5 million acres of forest today. And many of the reasons for that are related to some of the areas that were cleared for forests early on. A lot of very steep areas that were maybe a little too wet to farm. Folks tried to farm those areas and found out they just could not make a living farming that kind of ground. And so a lot of that ground was abandoned from agriculture, and because of the productivity of our soils and the fact that trees drop seeds and wildlife scatter those seeds, our forests returned in great numbers on that marginal agricultural land. In addition to that, we've also had a variety of conservation efforts aimed at planting trees. And so starting in the early 1900s and continuing through that whole century up to now, we have a variety of programs that encourage people to plant trees across the state of Indiana. And of course, many of our seedlings come from our state forest nurseries that provide over 4 million tree seedlings a year for people to plant and reforest areas across the state.